There was a single day when Bob Hope's greatest victory on the golf course was also his most generous act, and the astonishing truth is, he had no idea he was doing it. This isn't just a story about a bet. It's a story about a secret, a meticulously planned, beautifully executed act of friendship so profound that it redefines what it means to win. The wager itself entered Hollywood legend. Two icons, one green fairway, a sum of money that would stagger most people, even them. But the real story, the one hidden in plain sight for decades, isn't about the money that changed hands. It's about the understanding that passed between two men. It's about why Dean Martin, from the very moment he shook on that bet, never intended to win a single cent. Let's be clear, Dean Martin could have won. He should have won by any objective measure. He possessed a casual, natural athleticism that translated into a near-perfect golf game. Where others strained and practiced, Dean seemed to simply flow. He was a scratch golfer, the kind who could match professionals on his best days. Bob Hope knew this. It was the source of a quiet, persistent frustration that lived in the back of his mind for years. So why would Dean deliberately engineer a loss? The answer lies not in the game, but in the man he was playing against. To understand the gravity of Dean's decision, you have to understand Bob Hope in 1968. The public saw an American monument, a man who had mastered every medium, vaudeville, radio, film, television. He was the nation's comedian, the guy who brought laughter to presidents and soldiers on the front lines. He had built an empire on timing, on ambition, on an unrelenting drive to be the best. But that empire, that identity, was a structure. Unlike any structure, it had pressure points. For Bob, one of the most significant pressure points was the golf course. It wasn't a hobby, it was a proving ground. In a life lived in the blur of spotlights and scripts, golf was concrete. Your score didn't lie. Your handicap was a mathematical testament to your skill. Bob cultivated that skill with a seriousness few understood. He took lessons. He analyzed his swing. He played with generals and CEOs, not just for fun, but to measure himself. The golf course was where Bob Hope, the performer, had to step aside. And Bob Hope, the man, stood alone with his own competitiveness. And in that arena, there was always Dean Martin, who would amble onto the tee with a joke and a drink, who treated the game with a joyful nonchalance that drove Bob quietly mad. Dean, who somehow infuriatingly often won. Their friendship was genuine, deep, and laced with this friendly rivalry. But for Bob, each loss was a tiny crack in the facade. He would be gracious, of course, the perfect sportsman. But later, he would replay the shots. He'd dwell on the missed putt on the 14th hole, the drive that found the bunker on the 7th. It wasn't about the money in their casual games. It was about a fundamental need to prove his mastery to himself most of all. So when Bob issued the formal challenge in the spring of 1968, it was a culmination. This wasn't another weekend round. This was a summit, $50,000, a sum so large it made the stakes brutally, undeniably real. They were at the Friars Club, surrounded by the low hum of conversation and clinking glasses. Bob leaned in, the usual jesting tone replaced by a steely calm. "Dean," he said, "let's make it real. A proper match. $50,000, winner takes all. No excuses." Dean Martin looked at his friend. He saw not just the challenge in his eyes, but the need. This was more than a bet for Bob, it was a quest for validation. In that instant, the outcome was decided. Dean took a slow sip of his drink, letting the moment hang in the air. He could win. He could take Bob's money, and likely their friendship would survive, albeit with a new, unspoken scar, or he could do something else entirely. He smiled that famous, easy smile. "You're on, Bob, but don't say I didn't warn you." The date was set for a Saturday in May at the exclusive Lakeside Country Club, just the two of them, no audience, no cameras, a private drama on a public stage. What Bob Hope drove home that night was a sense of fierce determination. What Dean Martin did was pick up the telephone. He called his business manager, a man accustomed to Dean's unique ways, but never quite prepared for them. "I need you to arrange a donation," Dean said, his voice calm. $50,000 to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis. The manager acknowledged, already calculating the logistics. Then Dean delivered the final, crucial instruction, "and make sure the donation is credited in the name of Bob Hope. Not me, Bob Hope." There was a pause on the line, a silence filled with bureaucratic confusion. "Dean, I don't. If the money is coming from your account, the tax implications." Do it exactly as I said, Dean interjected, his tone leaving no room for debate. The transfer is to happen on Sunday, after our game. He hung up. The machinery of his generosity was now in motion, entirely separate from the game itself. The true prize had already been claimed by those who needed it most. All that was left was the performance. The morning of the match dawned clear and bright over Los Angeles, the kind of day that seems engineered for cinema. At Lakeside, the air was still, the fairways immaculate emerald ribbons. The two men met on the first tee. The handshake was firm, the smiles were genuine, but the currents running beneath were utterly different. Bob vibrated with focused intensity. He went through his pre-shot routine with meticulous care, visualizing the arc of the ball. Dean stretched lazily, cracked a joke about the early hour, and looked for all the world like a man without a care. Bob teed off first, a clean, powerful drive that split the fairway, a perfect start. He nodded satisfied. Then Dean stepped up. He took a practice swing that was pure poetry, a smooth, effortless coil and release. For a fleeting second, Bob's stomach tightened. Here it comes. But Dean's actual swing, while still beautiful, was subtly different. A fraction off in tempo. The ball rocketed off the tee, flying long, but with a slight, almost imperceptible draw. It landed in the center of the fairway, but 20 yards shorter than his usual distance. Still a great shot, but not a Dean Martin shot. This was the beginning of Dean's masterpiece. For the next 4 hours, he conducted a symphony of deliberate, calculated near misses. He wasn't playing poorly. That would have been an insult, and Bob would have sensed it. He was playing just well enough to make it believable. His approach shots would land on the green, but always on the wrong tier, leaving him a treacherous, breaking putt. He'd read the break perfectly, tapped the ball with his signature gentle touch, and watch it lip out of the cup, grazing the edge before spinning away. He'd find sand traps, but always with a lie that allowed a recovery. He'd hit into the rough, but never so deep he couldn't advance the ball. Every error was plausible. Every missed opportunity could be chalked up to a moment's lapse, a gust of wind, a grain of bad luck. He was constructing a narrative of an off day, and he was doing it with the skill of a master playwright. Meanwhile, Bob Hope was experiencing a kind of transcendence. The elusive victory was materializing before him. His own game was sharp, fueled by adrenaline and this new, intoxicating possibility. With each hole Dean failed to capture, Bob's confidence solidified. The putts that once daunted him now seemed to funnel toward the hole. The drives felt longer, straighter. By the time they reached the turn after 9 holes, Bob held a significant lead. During their brief break, he was animated, dissecting his own excellent play. Dean listened, nodding, offering genuine praise. "You're really connecting today, Bob. Everything's pure." He meant it. He was admiring his own handiwork in the joy it was bringing his friend. The back 9 was a coronation march. Bob Hope, playing the best golf of his life against his greatest rival, was invincible. On the 18th green, as he sank the final putt to seal his victory, he didn't just smile. He beamed. A weight had been lifted. A ghost had been exorcised. He had finally, definitively, beaten Dean Martin. Dean was the first to extend his hand. "Congratulations, Bob. You were magnificent, truly." The warmth in his voice was real. He pulled out his checkbook right there, leaning on his putter for balance. He wrote out the figure with a flourish, $50,000. He handed the crisp check over. "You earned every penny." Bob took it. The paper felt like a trophy, a certificate of achievement. He held it, absorbing the reality. This was proof. He drove home that evening not as a comedian returning from work, but as a champion returning from a field of battle. He showed the check to his wife, Dolores. "I did it," he said, the pride evident. He placed it on his desk, intending to frame it. For 24 hours, he owned that victory, that tangible proof of supremacy. It was one of the happiest days of his life. The following morning, Bob went to his bank in Beverly Hills. He approached the teller with a spring in his step, presenting the check. "I'd like to deposit this, please." The teller, recognizing him, smiled and processed the transaction. Her smile faded as she looked at her screen. She looked at the check, then back at her screen. A faint line of confusion appeared on her brow. "Mr. Hope," she said gently, "this check, it's already been cleared." Bob's smile didn't fade so much as it froze. "That's impossible. It was written to me yesterday." The teller nodded, tapping a key. It was processed yesterday afternoon at 3:47 p.m. The funds were electronically transferred. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. They were transferred to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. It's recorded as a charitable donation in your name, sir. The lobby of the bank seemed to grow very quiet. The sounds of typing and quiet conversation faded into a distant hum. Bob Hope stood perfectly still, the check held loosely in his fingers. In a single, vertiginous moment, the entire architecture of the previous day collapsed and reassembled itself into a new, breathtaking shape. The near misses, the lip-outs, the gracious compliments. It wasn't luck. It wasn't an off day. It was a gift. A $50,000 gift, wrapped in 18 holes of brilliant, selfless theater. A laugh burst from him, a short, startled sound of pure astonishment, then another. He wasn't angry, he was awestruck. The sheer audacity, the psychological subtlety, the profound kindness of it all washed over him. Dean had let him have his triumph, his precious, hardened victory, and then had quietly ensured that the spoils of that war went to heal children. Bob thanked the teller, turned, and walked out of the bank, his mind racing. He didn't call. He got in his car and drove directly to Dean's house, the check still in his pocket. He was let in by a staff member and found Dean, as he knew he would, by the pool, shaded by an umbrella, a newspaper in his lap. Dean looked up, saw Bob's face, and that slow, knowing smile spread across his own. He didn't say a word. "You," Bob said, pointing a finger, his voice a mix of accusation and wonder. "You magnificent schemer." Dean feigned innocence, raising his hands. "What, can't a man enjoy his Sunday?" Bob sat down heavily in the chair beside him. He pulled out the now irrelevant check and laid it on the table between them. "St. Jude, in my name." Dean shrugged, taking a sip from his glass. "Seems like a good cause, and you're a generous guy, Bob. Everyone knows that." The pretense fell away then. They looked at each other, two old friends who had seen every facet of each other over decades. The laughter subsided, replaced by a thick, comfortable silence. "Why, Dean?" Bob asked, his voice softer now. "Why go through all of that, the whole charade? You could have just written the check." Dean set his glass down, his usual levity gone. "Because you needed to win, Bob. You really needed it. Not the money, the win. If I'd just given the money to the hospital, that's one thing. But if I'd beaten you and then given it away, what would you have had? You'd have had another loss to me. This way," he gestured to the check. "This way you got the win. You got to feel like a champion for a day. You get the credit for a donation that'll do real good. And I." He smiled again, a genuine, quiet smile. "I got to give my friend a day he'll never forget. Seemed like a fair trade." Bob Hope looked away, out over the glittering pool. He felt a tightness in his throat, a prickling in his eyes. In a career built on words, he found himself without them. The emotional calculus of what Dean had done was overwhelming. It was an act of love, so discerning it had seen into the core of his competitive soul and had chosen to nourish it rather than challenge it. Dean hadn't just thrown a game. He had crafted an experience designed solely for Bob's happiness and pride, and then had anonymously multiplied its goodness into the world. He turned back, his eyes glistening. "You're a better man than I am, Dean." Dean shook his head, picking up his glass again. "Nah, just a better golfer who knows when to lose." They both laughed then, the tension dissolving into the warm California afternoon. The check stayed on the table, a silent testament to a victory that belonged to both of them in ways the world would never fully grasp. Bob Hope told this story for the rest of his life. He told it on talk shows, in interviews, to friends at dinner parties. And every single time, his voice would grow thick when he reached the moment in the bank. He wasn't crying over the money or the lost victory. He was crying over the staggering, quiet generosity of the act. At Dean Martin's memorial service years later, a frail Bob Hope took the stage and shared the story once more, his voice breaking. "Dean let me win," he said to the gathered mourners. "And in doing so, he taught me that the highest form of winning isn't about standing over a defeated opponent. It's about knowing what victory means to the other person, and sometimes handing it to them with an open hand and a full heart." That is the legacy of that day. It transcends golf, celebrity, and money. It is a masterclass in emotional intelligence, the rarest and most valuable kind of genius. It's about seeing the hidden need in someone you care for, the unspoken crack in their armor, and choosing to mend it not with pity, but with respect and ingenious grace. Dean Martin gave Bob Hope the gift of being a winner. But in that giving, he won something far greater, the enduring lesson that true strength lies in the power to elevate others, even from a position of certain victory. In the end, the only score that ever mattered was the measure of their friendship, and on that day, Dean Martin ensured it was forever untouchable. If this story of hidden loyalty and brilliant kindness resonated with you, if it reminded you that the most profound actions are often the ones never seen, then please help us share it. Liking this video tells the algorithm to show it to others who might need to hear this message. And subscobing to Winds of Thought ensures you don't miss our next exploration into the untold stories that reveal the depth of the human spirit. The greatest victories, after all, are the ones we create for each other.